Please join me in speaking these opening words. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together. It's been said that Unitarian Universalism is the religion that puts its faith in you, trusting each individual to engage in a spiritual journey and to reach your own conclusions about spiritual matters. We do that in beloved community as we support one another in faith and in friendship. And in that spirit, this congregation has created a covenant, a sacred promise of how we will strive to be with one another. Please join me in speaking our covenant. Together we promise to gather in compassionate community to celebrate diversity of thought and unity of spirit, and to seek wholeness for ourselves, our children, and our world. And as we gather, we acknowledge that our church is built on occupied land that once belonged to the First Nations people of this region, the Haudenosaunee, and the people known as the Neutrals before them. May we be good stewards of the land and courageously cultivate community with all living things.
Book sale. In my hometown, it was the annual event that I arranged the rest of my calendar around. Funny, it never occurred to me to donate books, but I more than made up for it in purchasing them. One year, while I was in seminary, I struck gold. I picked up several volumes by UU scholar and theologian James Luther Adams, a spare copy to lend of John Buren's and Forrest Church's A Chosen Faith, and a strangely titled book, Dear Mr. Brown, by Harry Emerson Fosdick. I didn't know anything about Reverend Fosdick, but I remembered seeing his name in some of my seminary reading. I went home a very happy camper. The books went on the shelf. I referenced the Adams book for papers and sermons, and I lent A Chosen Faith to inquiring friends. And I never even opened the cover of Dear Mr. Brown. We packed up and moved to Spartanburg, South Carolina, and 3 years later, packed up and moved to Lockport. Then we packed up and moved to our current home, and Dear Mr. Brown remained unopened and unread. This month's Soul Matters theme is Holding History. As I was thinking about the services this month and what they would look like, I stood in front of my bookcase seeking inspiration. After 12 years of schlepping that book around, I finally opened Dear Mr. Brown. I learned that Harry Emerson Fosdick had been quite the influential preacher. He was born in 1878, right here in Buffalo. Fosdick became a central figure in the fundamentalist modernist controversy within American Protestantism in the 1920s and 30s, and was one of the most prominent liberal ministers of the early 20th century. No wonder I'd seen his name passingly in my seminary reading. Dear Mr. Brown is a series of letters to a fictitious Ted Brown, answering questions about Unitarianism, which at the time of publication in early '61 was still a standalone faith. He addresses goodness without God, modern science and the Bible, and how to explain the world's evil. As I looked more closely, I was surprised to find that the theology that Fosdick was promoting was most definitely liberal Christianity. I had thought that the Unitarians had fully embraced humanism and rationalism by mid-century, but this leading liberal minister of the time most definitely considered himself and his faith Christian. That made me wonder what other surprises might be awaiting discovery in the history of our blended faith family. So that's what we'll explore this morning. Some of the names and history will be familiar, some may be brand new. As we learned from Onondaga storyteller Perry Ground last week, some stories can take 10 days to tell. So we will take the butterflies approach, flitting about and briefly alighting on interesting-looking blossoms. What I hope we will appreciate throughout this narrative is that ours is a living tradition, open to change as new knowledge and experience is revealed. So let's venture back through the mists of time for a whirlwind tour through our beloved living tradition. Both Unitarianism and Universalism began as doctrinal positions in the early church. Unitarians affirmed the unity or oneness of God, rejecting the notion of the Trinity. Universalists affirmed universal salvation, arguing that a loving God would not consign any of his creation to eternal torment. Unitarianism was deemed heretical at the Council of Nicaea in 325 of the Common Era, and Universalism got its eviction notice at a church council in 544. Although both doctrines were rejected by Orthodox Christianity, the people who espoused these ideas still considered themselves Christian, and in fact, holding the more legitimate claim on Jesus' teaching. Because espousing either of these doctrines could result in a death sentence, with burning at the stake being the most popular punishment, Unitarianism and Universalism went underground and emerged again in the midst of the Renaissance and the Protestant Reformation. Perhaps you know the story of Michael Servetus.
Michael Servetus, bright, educated, and very intelligent. He lived when the Renaissance was in full swing, and the Protestant Reformation had begun. No better time? For Servetus, it was a formula for death. Michael Servetus was born in Aragon, Spain in 1511. He studied Latin, Hebrew, and Greek, and was very gifted in them.
Born in Spain. Went to the university at the age of 13. Went on to school, went to another university at the age of 16.
At the urging of his father, he studied law at the University of Toulouse. Regardless of where he was or what he was doing, his vast interest in areas of study caused him to think deeply. Before he was 21 years old, he began publishing. Reading the Bible, he was surprised that the Trinity was not explicitly stated or defined.
Michael Servetus studied the Bible, and he realized he studied it, and the Trinity was not in the Bible. It's not in the Bible at all.
In July of 1531, he published On the Errors of the Trinity. He believed God is one, and that he was not three persons. He wrote that Jesus was the manifestation of this one God, as a man, and what is called the Son. The invention of the printing press had loosed thought and discussion. In the following months, he published Dialogues on the Trinity and On the Justice of Christ's Reign. To no avail, his books were confiscated and was sought after by the Spanish Inquisition.
He believed that Jesus was the Son of the eternal God.
He fled to France and took the pseudonym Michael of Villanueva to avoid persecution. Servetus went on to Paris to study mathematics and medicine and worked 12 years as a physician in Vienna. He was the first doctor to challenge and scientifically argue against the theories of Galen, which had predominated medical schools worldwide for 14 centuries, most notably and correctly about the pulmonary circulation of the blood. But all the while, deep in biblical and theological thought, he was preparing his major work called The Restoration of Christianity. In 1546, he began to correspond with chief reformer John Calvin, now pastoring in Geneva, Switzerland. Years later, in 1553, when Servetus finished his restoration work, he sent a copy to Calvin. When Calvin saw it, though it was under a pseudonym, it dawned on him it must be Servetus. And John Calvin turned him in to the Catholic Inquisition in France. Servetus was promptly arrested and thrown in jail and interrogated. But not for long, because Servetus escaped. But where does he go? He was wanted in Spain and France. He thought, well, I've sent my work to Calvin in Geneva. Perhaps he'll accept me there. And Servetus boldly went to Geneva.
And Michael boldly went to Geneva to John Calvin's church, and when he arrived at John Calvin's church, he was immediately thrown into jail for his beliefs.
Recognized in Geneva at John Calvin's church, he was arrested and tried for heresy. He was sentenced to burn at the stake. Calvin, in a lame attempt, asked that Servetus be mercifully beheaded. The council insisted he should be burned at the stake.
They were after him all the time because of his belief that he didn't agree with the Trinity. And he was burned at the stake. They turned around, and when he burned him, they put straw on his head and wet it so it would burn slower. And they put sulfur on his head so it would burn hotter.
Spectators were impressed by the tenacity of Servetus' faith.
Calvin wanted Michael to say that Jesus is the eternal Son of God. Michael Servetus says, I believe he is the Son of the eternal God.
On October 27, 1553, perishing in the flames, he is said to have cried out, O Jesus, Son of the eternal God. a witness to the execution, observed that Servetus, defiant to the last, might have been saved had he but called upon Jesus, the Eternal Son. Michael Servetus, his life, his passion, came violently to a close, but his testimony and bravery has sparked millions to a faith which upholds the deity of Jesus Christ, yet retains the strict monotheism central to the Scripture. No man, when he hath lighted a candle, covereth it with a vessel, or put it under a bed, but setteth it on a candlestick, that they which enter in may see the light. For nothing is secret that shall not be made manifest, neither anything hid that shall not be known and come abroad.
Michael Servetus was definitely a holy troublemaker, living and dying by the dictates of his convictions. There are so many notable names from this time in our history. Giorgio Biandrata brought Unitarianism to Poland. Francis David, advisor to King Sigismund of Transylvania, was imprisoned and martyred for his faith. So many holy troublemakers who took their faith so seriously that they were willing to risk imprisonment and death to sow the seeds of a Christianity that was based not on orthodoxy's emphasis on right belief, but on the worth and dignity of individuals and the power of free thinking. I really could go on, name-dropping the important Unitarian and Universalist ancestors throughout Europe and America, but I did promise that we would not indulge in the 10-day telling of our story. I'll sum up a portion of our rich history with a snippet from the Unitarian Universalist Pocket Guide, which is made available through our association. Regarding American Unitarian and Universalism, it is important to remember that we were born during a revolutionary period and that the humanistic values of the period saturated the lives of our late 18th and early 19th century forebears. The links we had with the American Revolution are many. Suffice it to say that most of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were what we would today call religious liberals. It will probably be no surprise that the two denominations of our blended faith family, and they were denominations of Christianity at that time, were some of the earliest to recognize and ordain women to ministry. There are denominations in our country and in our very community at this very moment who still will not recognize a woman's ordination. They're only 150 years behind the times. I want to bring to your attention a group of women who became known as the Iowa Sisterhood. If you have an excellent memory, you'll remember that I preached about them in March of 2016. For the rest of you, I'll give you the short version. There we go. The mid-1800s in America found people migrating from the East Coast, New England, and Mid-Atlantic states westward to the frontier. Both Unitarianism and Universalism had been growing for about 100 years, and everyone knows that if you're moving to a new home, you're going to need a church. The problem was that established male ministers all along the eastern seaboard had no desire to leave their good jobs for the unknowns of the frontier. This was definitely a problem. Who would go and establish churches and stake a claim for Unitarianism and Universalism? Meanwhile, women had for many years been clamoring to be welcomed into divinity school and to enter ministry. Aha, a solution. However, divinity school requires years of study, and people were on the move now. Only a handful of women had been allowed to complete their studies. The ordained few would be empowered to teach others, and since congregational polity empowered congregations to ordain their religious leaders, a self-perpetuating system could help fill the gap. What the church leadership did not anticipate was how good these women would be at doing their jobs. They created homey and cozy church buildings. Between Sundays, they offered classes in a wide range of topics for all ages. They started book discussion groups and gave people a chance to voice their thoughts. And their preaching was practical and mercifully shorter in duration than the hours-long rhetoric of their male counterparts back east. Oh my, I haven't even mentioned our beloved transcendentalists, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, among others. And what about all of the reformers, leaders in abolition, mental health reform, public education, voting rights, and so many other worthy causes? Nothing of Joseph Priestley, John Murray, and William Ellery Channing, and their like. And those are just on our side of the Atlantic. But I did promise a whirlwind and a mere synopsis of the 10-day telling of our story. And our exploration is regarding unexpected history and the impact on our living tradition, now and in the future. We'll pause for a time of quiet reflection. The American spiritual teacher Ram Dass has described our lives as simply walking each other home. I love the understanding and compassion in that statement. Whether we are walking each other home to the wholeness of ourselves or to the end of our lives, what matters is that we are not alone. There is a love that holds us, and we extend that love to one another. We'll pause for a bit of quiet, and then I'll offer a prayer and invite you to come forward after that with an opportunity to place a stone or shell on the labyrinth for those joys, concerns, and sorrows that you carry with you today. Let's enter the quiet. Spirit of community, of life and love, in which we share and find strength and common purpose. We turn our minds and hearts toward one another, seeking to bring into our circle of concern all who need our love and support. Those who are ill, those who are in pain, either in body or in spirit, those who are lonely or grieving, those who have been wronged. Holding in your heart the names of those needing love and support, I invite you forward. We are part of a web of life that makes us one with all humanity, one with all the universe. We are grateful for the miracle of consciousness that we share. The consciousness that gives us the power to remember, to love, and to care. Amen, Ashe, and blessed be.
Time for All Ages is about a holy troublemaker of contemporary holy troublemaker named Thich Nhat Hanh. It's adapted from Holy Troublemakers by Deneen Akers. One day in Hue, a city in central Vietnam, a little boy of 8 looks through the pages of a popular Buddhist magazine and sees the face of Buddha, the founder of Buddhism. Something about this picture especially captured this boy. In it, Buddha is sitting on the grass. His serene smile is filled with gratitude. I want to know that kind of joy and peace, the boy thinks to himself. This young boy will grow up to be Thich Nhat Hanh, a committed peace activist and one of the best-known teachers of Buddhism. He was ordained as a beginning monk when he was 16 years old. Later in life, his followers would call him Thầy, the Vietnamese word for teacher. Buddhism in the early 1960s in Vietnam usually was personal inner work. Buddhists weren't very involved in politics or social movements. Thầy taught the inner principles of Buddhism, and he developed a concept which he called engaged Buddhism. Thầy believed that the practices of Buddhism to develop inner peace and contentment should also benefit people and community. He wanted to apply Buddhist practices to the real suffering around him. He wanted to offer a new kind of Buddhism, a Buddhism that could act as a raft to save the whole country from the desperate situation of conflict, division, and war. A war was already underway among a Vietnamese group working to make the country independent from the French, who had colonized Vietnam in the mid-1800s. In 1965, the U.S. began to get involved in this war too. Many young Buddhists responded to Thay's call to engaged Buddhism. Thay used his growing influence to work for peace for everyone. He founded an organization called Interbeing with several other monks and nuns who also believed in engaged Buddhism. They believed the violence needed to end and believed in a nonviolent process to make social change. They refused to take sides in the war, instead wanting to help anyone who was suffering. Thay's refusal to take sides upset both warring factions in his country. His growing influence made the government nervous. In 1966, he was invited to speak at a university in the United States, and he left Vietnam for a few weeks. He thought reaching out directly to Americans about the war would be most effective in creating peace. He met with important leaders of nonviolent movements in the U.S., including Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Thay and Dr. King quickly realized how much they had in common, even though they were working in such different parts of the world. They both believed in peace and equality, and they both believed in nonviolent methods to achieve their goals. The government in Vietnam was already angry with Thay for not taking their side in the war, and while Thay was visiting the U.S., the leaders of Vietnam exiled him. He was banned from returning home, and his country no longer considered him a citizen. Thay was devastated. His closest friends, fellow monks, and co-workers for peace were all back in Vietnam. The temple he had started, which he considered his spiritual home, was in Vietnam. My entire community was at home, he later said. I was like a bee taken out of a beehive. Eventually, France granted him asylum, allowing him to live in France and have the same freedom and rights as a French citizen. Although he missed his homeland, Thay began working for peace while living in France. He began a Buddhist temple in France, gave lectures, and represented Vietnam in the Paris peace talks. Although the Vietnam War ended in 1975, average Vietnamese people were still in danger. Those who had not taken the side of the winning party knew that they were not safe, and hundreds of thousands of people began leaving the country. Thay and the friends he'd made in France got to work helping these refugees called boat people. Sister Chan Chong was one of his closest friends who worked with him in Vietnam and in France. Thay and Sister Chan's combined efforts on behalf of the boat people raised the profile of all the Vietnamese refugees. The refugee crisis lasted from 1975 to 1995, and many countries, including the U.S., admitted around 2 million people. Thay continued to teach the principles of engaged Buddhism in France. So many people came to learn and practice Buddhism with him that he and his followers had to find a larger home. And in 1982, they bought a piece of land in southern France and named it Plum Village. and within a few years, it became the largest Buddhist monastery in the West. In 2014, Tay's health began to decline after he had a stroke, and since then, he has let his students do the teaching. He is content letting his daily life and presence serve as his teaching now. Now he sits serenely, just like that picture of the Buddha he was drawn to as such a young boy.
Thich Nhat Hanh's engaged Buddhism with practices to develop inner peace and contentment that would also benefit people and community resonated with what was happening at the time, not only in the world, but in Unitarianism and Universalism. There's a reason so many UUs are attracted to Buddhism as an individual practice that spreads out into the community in waves of compassion, loving kindness, and peaceful activism. Thich Nhat Hanh arrived in America in 1966. We were embroiled in an increasingly unpopular war. Martin Luther King Jr. was mobilizing the Black community in peaceful protest and creating a bridge between people of faith of various skin colors in the cause of civil rights. In 1961, the Unitarians and Universalists, both rejected by the World Council of Churches in the 1950s for not being Christian enough, had merged into a new entity, Unitarian Universalism, full of hope that this blended family would emerge into something new, a faith that embraced and celebrated diversity and pluralism with a commitment to do the work of justice. We transitioned from being denominations within Christianity to a standalone association of free congregations. The 20th century was a pivot point for our blended faith family. The first half was spent in struggle, trying to survive individually in a religious climate that had embraced nationalistic evangelical Christianity. There was also internal turbulence as humanism and rationalism found a firm foothold in Unitarianism. The two traditions, so similar in activism, but so apart in theology, made a leap of faith in the emerging potential of what they could create together. One of my seminary professors, Riley, said that at the merger, the Unitarians brought an organizational plan, and the Universalists brought a theology, and the Unitarians carried the day. In the late 1940s, the Unitarians began an expansion plan known as the Fellowship Movement, which continued into the late 60s after the merger. Small, autonomous, lay-led congregations were created wherever 10 or more religious liberals could be brought together. Holly Ulbricht, author of The Fellowship Movement, A Growth Strategy and Its Legacy, notes, during the formative period of the Fellowship Movement, humanism was the dominant theological position among Unitarians. Thus, one might expect fellowships to favor humanist theology. But why did so many of them adopt the intolerant viewpoint known as flat earth humanism, a fundamentalism of the left that resisted or even derided any notion of God, spirituality, or religious experience? What a strange journey from Christian heresy to an intolerance of anything smacking of spirituality. Here's a question for some of you long-timers here. Do you recall the controversy around passing an offering plate? Challenging religious language and distrusting ritual, even if it's just passing the plate, are part of the legacy of the Fellowship Movement. And although the number of congregations increased during that time, the number of actual Unitarian Universalists did not. Unexpected history. As much as we cherish our role as activists in justice work, we have a difficult history of tacit and implicit racism as an association. Things came to a head in the late 1960s, and the Black Unitarian Universalist Caucus was born. This predominantly Black group organized, came up with a vision, a mission, and a budget, which they presented to the larger association. Their demands were ignored, and instead, the predominantly white association created a separate entity, the Black Affairs Council. The members of the caucus were insulted at the apparent bait and switch and walked out on the General Assembly. Then another group was created, known as BAWA, the Black and White Alternative, a chapter of which was active here, within these very walls. 3 groups vying for recognition from the National Association, with one group, the Black Affairs Council, having the blessing of the larger body. It was an ugly, hurtful time, and although nearly 50 years have passed, there are still scars. Blacks and whites both felt betrayed and misunderstood, and since the problem was never handled directly, except in unilateral decisions by the overwhelmingly white leadership, decisions that did not align with the empowerment groups, we are still reaping a harvest of guilt, recrimination, and distrust. Unexpected history. Yet in the decades that followed, Unitarian Universalists affirmed LGBTQ+ folk in the pulpit and beyond. Collaborating with the United Church of Christ, a sexuality values program known as OWL, Our Whole Lives, was developed that spans from first graders to elders in the congregation. We supported marriage equality, protested on behalf of immigrants, stood with the waterkeepers at Standing Rock, and affirmed that Black lives really do matter. The Green Sanctuary program has blossomed into a full-blown climate justice effort. We have shown that a group can be small, but mighty. So where are we now, and where are we going? We are the authors of the next chapters of unexpected history, the future ancestors of this faith. Ours is a living tradition, evolving and emerging as we embrace and live into the legacy that was left for us. Some of that legacy is hard and requires us to humbly acknowledge the pain and to cultivate relationships that will help us do better. For many of us, Unitarian Universalism is a chosen faith, one we've come to from somewhere else. So it's easy to ask what Unitarian Universalism holds for us. But I wonder if we might turn that around and ask how we can bring our gifts, our commitment to spiritual practice, our passion for justice work, our insatiable curiosity to grow Unitarian Universalism into its next expression. What will be our contribution to the faith our children's children will inherit? I think the answer lies not only in the serious work of leaving the world a little better than we found it, but also in creativity, curiosity, risk, and joy. I think UU singer-songwriter Hal Walker and his friends have the right idea as they invite us to dance.
Many miles we have traveled on our way. Over the hopes and trials we have come down to this day. Now it's a time of learning, listening, building harmony. Now it's
Thank you for joining us in worship today. I hope you have been inspired and uplifted by sharing this time together. You can support the work and mission of this congregation by leaving a financial gift in one of the baskets at the back of the chapel on your way out. Please join me as we affirm our abundance. We pick fruit from trees we did not plant. We drink water from wells we did not dig. This is as it should be, so long as we dig and plant for those who will come after us. We extinguish our chalice with these familiar words. Please join me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you. I'm going to sing our parting song first to remind you of the melody, and then I invite you to sing it with me. Then I'll offer a benediction and ask you to hum it as I leave so I don't awkwardly leave in silence. How about that? So just listen the first time. Travel light and travel easy till I see you once again. Travel light and travel easy, and remember I'm your friend. All together. Travel light and travel easy, till I see you once again. Travel light and travel easy, and remember I'm your friend. Oh, you can keep humming. That's good. I'm going to say some more words, so you might want to save your hums. A benediction is a blessing, a way to close the sacred space we have shared and to transition to our regular lives, knowing that we are deeply connected even when apart. Since this month we are focusing on holding history, our parting words today come from the late Carl Titchener, longtime minister to this congregation. May your house be a place of happiness for all who enter it, a place where the old and the young are renewed in each other's company, a place for growing, a place for music, a place for laughter. And when shadows and darkness fall within its rooms, may it still be a place of hope and strength for all who enter it, especially for those who may be entrusted to your care. May no person be alien to your compassion. May your larger family be the family of all humankind. And may those who are nearest to you and dearest to you constantly be enriched by the beauty and bounty of your love for one another. Travel